Metamorphosis is the second full-length album from Ecocide, and this is a Netherlands-based, North Holland-based death metal band, and one that incorporates elements of both early 90s groove metal and crossover thrash metal, as far as I see it, into their sound, but still presents a sort of late 80s, early 90s old-school death metal sound overall. And I think the easy references to make on their early sound were probably the thrash of the time, plus a bit of Pestilence, and eventually as their first album released, we heard a lot more nods to both Leprosy and some of the European death metal that sort of came about in its image in some sense, where early Pestilence, the 80s albums, and early Morgoth took another pass at that style of riffcraft and songcraft, and I think that was a big inspiration for that first record. There was a couple of mishaps on their early work. I think that some of the vocals were strange and some of the riffs didn't quite get there. They sort of default to this chugging sound that is what I would have called half thrash back at the time. It wasn't as deep into the riff as I wanted from death thrash as I saw that first album. So the second album here, we'll see that there's a lot of those traits return when we listen to this song here.
Souls of the lost, washed away by the sea, absorbed by the gods, eternal destiny.
So the band disbanded at one point in 2015. They reformed in 2017. They tried a couple of new things. They disbanded in 2020. And then they came back here with this album in 2023. And the thing is, you can see them sticking to the muscle memory they know in terms of traditional late 80s, early 90s death metal. And you'll certainly hear nods to Obituary and Benediction and Pestilence, and some very direct nods to death songs. Again, the Leprosy era, and those are all very good things. I think that always catches my ear, and that's always what I want to hear. And I'm glad that there's still bands that show up and sound like that. I like a Van Drunen-esque vocalist. I like that cadence. I think it works really well for bands that lean into thrash once in a while. But that isn't really what makes this band interesting. I think that's just kind of the bass palette, and the way that they mess with it a little bit is that they throw in some more modern thrash and crossover thrash metal influences, some tougher kind of hardcore leaning stuff in that realm. And they also throw in more of their interest in groove metal riffs. And I would say more the sort of plainly syncopated style we would have heard in the early 90s. Not so much the Pantera style, but more the moshable stuff that's very simple. So that won't work for everyone. I know that's the kind of thing that there's a level of simplicity to it that it doesn't necessarily work with if you're a fan of late 80s thrash metal. But when you work in death metal, naturally it makes sense, especially if you're a fan of Obituary and kind of the direction they moved in towards 1994. So this isn't quite that simple. There is a lot of detail to these songs, but it does stick somewhere between two different nodes of old school death metal and groove thrash metal. So there are a lot of bands that do that style, but I do feel like these guys have found at least something different to do with it. So if you're a fan of groups like Ex-Hoarder and those types of groups, you'll understand what this band is doing a little bit better than others. So not 100% for me. For me, this is a moderately high recommendation. I think that the sound is perfect. I like the visual design of it. I think that the references all stand out for me, but I wouldn't necessarily return to those simpler moshable riffs because it just doesn't do much for me. I'd have to see how the band sounds live to see how effective that is for my taste. So a little bit tentative on that one. I don't know what others will think of it, but I had a good time kind of digging into it and finding both the references and their own point of view. So interesting record. Go ahead and check it out when it releases. It's out today, actually, as I'm recording this, and you can read the review for more details.
No one needs your screams. Near the end, it all feels like a dream. You will finally